Today, I'm going to show you my 10 favorite tricks with layer masks in Photoshop. Hey there, and welcome to Phlearn. My name is Aaron Nace. You can find me on phlearn.com, where we make learning fun, and I'm so excited to be sharing my 10 favorite tips with layer masks. Now, if you've never used a layer mask, basically they allow you to hide or show certain parts of your layer, and they can be undone at any point in time, making them completely non-destructive. So they're much better to use than a tool like the eraser tool. All right, let's get into our tips. So our first tip is to create a white or a black layer mask, either making everything visible or invisible. So to create a white layer mask, simply go right down here to your layer mask icon and click. You're going to see we have a white layer mask here that makes everything visible. Now, let's say by default, I want the entire layer mask to be black and my entire layer invisible. Instead of just clicking on my layer mask, I'm going to click Alt or Option and click on my layer mask. And you can see by default, we have a black layer mask now. And then I could simply make a selection right around where I wanted to. There we go. I can go to Edit, down to Fill, and I'm going to go ahead and choose this to be white. And there we go. Now we have our subject. Moving on to tip number 2, this allows you to move your layer and your layer mask independently. So in our last example, where I went ahead and created a layer mask around my subject, it's not perfectly centered around my subject's face. So by default, I have my layer and my layer mask. Now you'll notice when I click on my layer, I have a white bounding box around my layer. And when I click on my mask, I have a bounding box around my mask. Now, if I use my move tool and click and drag, you're going to see it's going to move both of them at the same time. Let's go ahead and undo that. If I click on the chain link between my layer and my layer mask, it's going to allow me to move each of these individually. So let's go ahead and unlink these. Now you can see I can click on my layer and simply move my layer, but the mask stays still. Or I can click on my mask and move my mask around, but my layer stays still. And once I have them exactly where I want, I can go ahead and click on that chain link and we're good to go. They'll move together once more. Our third tip is to use a selection first and then convert it into a layer mask to know exactly where you're going to be masking out. So let's go ahead and just click our layer mask down to the trash can. We're going to delete that real quick. Hit delete, and we'll just move this right to the center again. There we go. Now, let's say we know we want to make a selection around our subject's face. We're going to go to our marquee selection tool. I'm going to hold Shift, there we go, and it's going to allow me to create a perfect circle right around my subject. By the way, you can hold the spacebar key while you're creating selections in Photoshop to move the selection around. There we go. So I'm going to make a selection right around my subject's face, and then if I have a selection active already, all I have to do is click on my layer mask icon, and it's going to turn that selection into a mask. Now, this works with any types of selections, including the marquee tool, the lasso tool, and even advanced selections like select color range. Next up, we have inversing the layer mask by hitting Control or Command I. So if I click on my layer mask here and I hit Control or Command I, it's going to inverse my layer mask, making what was light dark and what was dark light. It's changing the visibility of the layer mask. So it's a real quick way if you accidentally, okay, let's go ahead and say we fill everything with white. If I go ahead and make a selection here and then I fill that with black, there we go. And I'm like, oh, I want the opposite. Just deselect, hit Control or Command I, and you're good to go. Next up, we have a quick way of filling your layer mask with black or white, making your layer either invisible or visible. So once you have a layer mask active, go ahead and hit D for your default colors. That's always going to be white and black. Now, if I hit Control or Command Delete, it's going to fill my layer mask with black, making my layer invisible. If I hold Alt or Option Delete, it's going to fill that with white. So again, Control or Command Delete fills with your background color. In this case, it's black. Alt or Option Delete fills with your foreground color. In this case, it's white. That way, if you have some areas that you want to just go ahead and make a selection, you want those to be invisible, Control or Command Delete fills with your background color. I'm going to hit Control or Command D to deselect. Alt or Option Delete fills with white, and everything's visible again. Now for our next tip, I'm going to show you how to create a keyboard shortcut for adding a layer mask in Photoshop. Layer masks are very commonly used, but for some reason there's no default keyboard shortcut, so we're going to set one up. We'll go to Edit and then all the way down to the bottom to Keyboard Shortcuts. So here in Keyboard Shortcuts, we're going to go to Layer. We're going to scroll way down here until we see layer mask and reveal all. You can see I've set one up. Let's go ahead and just hit delete right there. Where we have reveal all, that's going to create a white layer mask, and hide all would create a black layer mask. So if you want to create shortcuts for both of those, you can do that here. Generally, I just create one for the white. So let's click right here. I like to use Shift Option Command M for mask and hit accept. Now it might say that you have a conflict. You can hit accept and go to conflict and then just remove the keyboard shortcut from the other one if you're not using it. Or of course you can just create your own keyboard shortcut. So let's hit accept there and hit OK. You can see this at any time by going into your keyboard shortcuts. And now we can see if I hit Shift Option Command M, it automatically creates a layer mask. I can hit Controller Command I to invert that, Controller Command I to invert it back again. Our next tip allows you to copy a layer mask from one layer to another and even to a group. So I went ahead and pulled in another image here. Let's just use the move tool to bring it into the same document. And now I have multiple layers in the same document. I'm gonna go ahead and make this invisible real quick. Now here on my layer mask, I'm gonna go ahead and just make a selection right around here. Let's just use our rectangular marquee tool. Okay, so we'll just make a selection right here. And then on our layer mask, what I'm going to do is I'm going to inverse my selection. So we'll go to select and then down here to inverse, which selects everything else. And then I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut Controller Command Delete to fill with black because black is my background color. So as you can see, I have a layer mask now that only allows my layer to be visible in this square. Now, if I make this other layer visible and I want it to be visible only in the same place, all I have to do is copy the layer mask from one layer to another. To do that, simply hold Alt or Option and click and drag the layer mask from one layer to another. You'll see a little preview of your layer mask and a double arrow. Go ahead and let go, and you can see now I have the exact same mask on two different layers. They're visible in the exact same place. Now, this works with groups as well. Let's go ahead and shift click both of these layers and hit Controller Command G to group them together. Now I can hold Alt or Option and click and drag the layer mask to the group itself, and then click on each one of these layers and then fill the layer mask with white. This allows me to move my layers around while keeping the visibility exactly where I want it because they're both defined by the group rather than the individual layer. In fact, I can delete these layer masks if I want. Let's go ahead and delete both of those. And now, if I want to, I can make changes on the group's layer mask. Let's just go ahead and create a selection inside here. We'll make it a little bit smaller here. There we are. I'm going to hit Shift Command I to inverse my selection, and then Controller Command Delete to fill that with black. And now you can see both of those layers are visible only in that area. Even if I move these layers around, they're still constrained by the same layer mask. And at any time, I can simply hold Alt or Option, copy that group mask back to these each individual layers. Then I can take the layers out of that group if I want and go ahead and delete the group. And we still have the layers visible in the exact same place. Our next tip allows you to make a selection out of your layer mask. It allows you to view the layer masks, temporarily disable them, and show a quick mask view. So back here in Photoshop, if I want to go ahead and temporarily disable the layer mask, simply hold Shift and click on the layer mask. You're going to get a red X through the layer mask, and you're going to see what the layer would look like without a layer mask. Hold Shift and click on it again to re-enable your layer mask. If you hold Alt or Option and click on the layer mask, you'll get a black and white representation of what the layer mask looks like. So you can see here it's all black with just white in the center. Now, if you want to turn the layer mask into a selection, you can hold Control or Command and click on your layer mask, turning it into a selection that then you could then use on another layer if you wanted to. Let's hit Control or Command D to deselect. And then, last but not least, hit the slash key above return to enter quick mask view. This will give you a nice visual representation of where your layer mask is. This can be very helpful with doing things like complex cutouts. Let's say you have a person in a background and you want to cut out their hair. Hitting this slash key enters quick mask view, and it allows you to very easily see where your mask is and is not visible. Next, we can change our density of the layer mask and add feathering with the properties panel. So if I simply double click right here on my layer mask, it opens up my properties panel. You can also go to window and then down to properties. Just make sure you're clicked on your layer mask. If you're on your layer, you're going to have different properties. So make sure you're clicked on your layer mask. Now here you can see I can change the density of the mask, which makes it more or less visible Okay, so if you want a temporary preview of what it looks like off or on, you can do that. Also, remember from the last tip, you can hold Shift and temporarily disable or enable it. You can also add feathering to the layer mask, which adds a softer edge. This is a really nice non-destructive way to add a softer edge to your masks. You don't have to change the masks themselves, and you can simply change this slider at any point in time. When you're done, just bring it back to where it was, close your properties, and you're good to go. So we've reached number 10, but stick around because we've got a bonus tip coming up after this. So our 10th tip allows you to hide or show your layer effects with your layer mask. If you've ever used layer effects, this is a really big help. So let's go ahead and just go make a selection here. I'm going to make a selection right around my subject. I'm going to go ahead and click on this layer and hit Control-Command-J. That's just going to duplicate that selection to a new layer. And you can see here I don't have a layer mask. Now I'm going to go ahead and move this to the right. We're going to double click right here and I'm going to add a layer style. We're just going to go to stroke because I want to add a white selection around my subject. There we go. Now check this out. I'm going to go ahead and click on my layer mask. We're just going to grab a marquee selection tool and make a selection right here. Then I'm going to hit D for my default colors and hit Command Delete. There we go. And deselect by hitting Control-Command-D. I'm going to go ahead and unlink the layer in the layer mask. So now if I move the layer mask around, you're going to see it's actually a pretty cool effect. The stroke stays with it. So no matter where I put it, that layer effect stays with it. Now, what happens if you want your layer mask to also hide that layer effect? We're simply going to double click on our layer, and then here in our blending options, we can see we have a selection for layer mask hides effects. If I click that, we can see now the layer mask is going to hide that stroke. If I unclick it, that stroke is going to be visible. So let's go ahead and hit OK here. I can simply click on my layer mask and move this around. Now you can see it hides the layer and the layer effect. If you want to turn that back on, all you have to do is simply go over here, go to layer mask hides effects, hit OK, and then you can move your layer mask or your layer, and you can see that stroke is going to stay with it. And we've made it to our bonus tip. This will effectively allow you to create 2 layer masks for the same layer. Now, technically there's no real way to do this. So what I do is I create a layer with a mask and then I group it with itself and then put a mask on that group. So I'll show you how to do this. I'm gonna go to my layer with my subject on it. We're gonna go to select and then I'm gonna go down to subject. All right, this is an automatic selection tool. I'm gonna click on my layer mask. I'm gonna hit Control-Command-I because we already have a layer mask. Control-Command-D to deselect, and then Control-Command-I again. Now I realize this is a very rough cutout of the subject, but we want to show you how to add multiple layer masks to this. Let's say I would then wanted to fade out my subject. Well, if I hold Alt or Option and click on my layer mask, you can see we have a nice layer mask here, and I don't necessarily want to go changing this layer mask. So sometimes you want to create an additional layer mask on a layer. Simply group it with itself, and then add a layer mask to that group. So we'll hit Control-Command-G to group it with itself and then add a layer mask to that group. Now I can use my brush tool and simply paint black all over my layer mask. There we go. And if I want to make that visible or invisible, I can do that while keeping this other layer mask intact. So I can simply make a selection, maybe right here around my subject. Perfect. I'm just gonna invert that on this layer mask, make that visible again. And then I can say, okay, I like that layer mask. This layer mask maybe isn't serving me. I'm gonna hold Shift to temporarily disable it, and you're good to go. So effectively, we kind of have 2 different layer masks for the same layer. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to get a free tutorial from us every single week, click on that subscribe button. Make sure you hit the bell to get notifications. And if you want to get instant access to over 200 pro tutorials teaching everything from compositing, retouching, and special effects, as well as 500 LUTs, presets, and Photoshop actions, check out Phlearn Pro. We have an exclusive discount available to you right down below. Thanks again. I'll Phlearn you later. Bye, everyone.